Supercars are back this weekend for their highly anticipated return to New Zealand, and there is no shortage of news, question marks, and excitement as we gear up for the racing ahead. I'm back as well after taking a brief pause on content over the Melbourne weekend. I was actually off getting married, but I'm back in action and ready to cover everything you need to know before the Supercars hit that Taupō tarmac. For the first time in a long time, Supercars is introducing a new track to the series in the form of Taupō International Motorsport Park, a permanent circuit that I am very curious to learn more about over the coming days. The track is 3.32 km in length, or just over 2 miles, with 14 corners in an anti-clockwise direction, and I would put the risk rating around here around the moderate mark, but I really do come into this one a little bit blinder than I normally do. In terms of a lap around this place, I actually want to start with the grid slots themselves. Taupō seems to have quite a short start-finish straight, and the starting line is actually quite far back along it as well. And by my estimation, I think the back few rows of the grid may even be starting around the final corner and may have to have a fair bit of left hand down on that steering wheel when they get the race started. But we'll see exactly where they line up in just a few days' time, but that's already a quirk I wanted to mention. Turn 1 is a fairly flowing hairpin off to the left, but Thomas Randall, who has previous racing experience here, suggests it could be the site of quite some carnage. After that, there's a nice flowing corner, a right-hander through turn 2. A similar story just off to the left at turn 3. There's some nice camber in the road here to help the cars get around there. After that, things pinch a little bit through the right-hander of turn 4 before you have a bit of a heavier braking zone at 5. 6 leads very quickly into turn 7, which is a left-handed hairpin just about again. And then you have a sweeper at 8, a really quick corner actually through turn 9. Turn 10 is a bit of a nothing. You just flow yourself through there before a very long hairpinish corner through 11, and that's going to be very important as it sets you up for the back straight. And at the end of that long straight, you have a very quick sequence to end the lap. You've got 12, 13 and 14, and just another quirk of this place I've noticed, a bit like Winton actually, the final corner has a pit exit barrier that pokes out and comes out quite quickly as well, so another thing to keep your eye on. In terms of spots to watch, I must admit, before Supercars expressed interest in this circuit, I had not heard of it, but based on the virtual laps I've seen and some of the other categories that I've raced around here, there's a few things that have caught my eye. The first one is actually turn 4, because turns 1 to 3 look like they'll promote some good side-by-side action, but it's actually quite off-camber here at turn 4, and I feel like if there's anyone next to each other through here, things could get a bit tight, and possibly the driver on the outside could be put into the grass. That would be an interesting one to watch out for. My next corner to look out for is turn 9. I've already suggested this is quite high speed. It looks like a bravery corner. It kind of reminds me of one of the first few corners around the Bend Motorsport Park, but there's nowhere near as much runoff as we see around that place, so that will be a cool one to watch. And then the end of the lap is really interesting because I feel like we're going to see some nice side-by-side action down that back straight, but the sequence of corners, almost like a high-speed chicane 12 to 14, I'm really curious to see how the cars race through there, because yes, you've got the long straight to promote some slipstreaming and some overtaking, but the entry speed is actually quite high, and I'm really curious to see how the drivers position themselves here. The format this weekend is also an interesting one, and we'll get into some of the quirks of it very shortly, but the action gets underway at 10:55 Australian Eastern Standard Time on the Friday morning for practice 1, and that's a 90-minute session, the only time Supercars will be on track that day. It's looking like partly cloudy with some showers around on Friday. Similar story with the weather on Saturday, but of course the running gets a bit more competitive. You've got qualifying for the first race of the weekend in the morning, followed by a top 10 shootout, which I'm really looking forward to around this place. And the first race of the weekend, the first race of Supercars around Taupō, that will get underway at 1:05 p.m. once again, Australian Eastern Standard Time. On Sunday, the weather looks to be getting a little bit better at this stage, and we just repeat the format once again with some slight tweaks to the timings. Qualifying in the morning, top 10 shootout not too long after, and of course another 60 lapper to finish things up. Of course, I am recording this on a Monday, so the weather forecast may change, and in fact it is moving around quite a bit, so be sure to keep an eye on that as the race gets closer. So what have been the key headlines since the last event? Well, Melbourne is actually where we'll kick things off, because it sounds like Supercars are working with the Australian Grand Prix Association to ensure fans get Supercars paddock access again at a future Grand Prix should they return. That's obviously great news. What may be a bit more divisive though is the news that Stefano Domenicali has strongly hinted that Supercars are close to landing a deal to be on more F1 support races. Particularly in Asia it was hinted at, where we could see Supercars supporting F1. I know overseas races are always controversial among Supercars fans. I'm actually for it to an extent. I think 1 or 2 extra races supporting F1 would be overall a good move for the sport, given F1's popularity right now. However, I definitely don't want it to come at the cost of any races we already have here in Australia and New Zealand. And even then, it would still be a bit heartbreaking to see Supercars go to other countries while places like Phillip Island and Winton miss out as they currently do. So an interesting storyline to follow there in the coming months and potentially over the next year or so. Back here though, Cameron Waters made his NASCAR Truck Series debut in America. He ultimately crashed out of that race but seemed to enjoy himself and seems to be planning future starts over there as well. Supercars have released a 2-part docu-series looking at 5 of the drivers in the field, specifically the New Zealanders ahead of round 3 in Taupō. That's a really good series, highly recommend it. Only 2 20-minute episodes, so very low commitment, and it gives you an insight into some of their personalities, which I really enjoyed. There have been teams announcing some or unveiling some special liveries ahead of New Zealand. My absolute favourite and the most striking so far is by the Grove Racing team. Penrite Racing, they've done a fantastic job, as they always do, with their liveries, and they have a nice silver-based car this weekend that I reckon will look even better in the sunlight. Looking further ahead, after New Zealand, there have been some changes to the Super Sprint format, which I welcome very greatly, and we'll see those in effect from Perth and a few other events as well. I'll discuss that in a bit more detail in my Perth preview, but I'm a really big fan of the changes they've made. The absolute biggest news, however, is that Brody Kostecki, the 2023 Supercars champion, will be back on track this weekend in an Erebus machine, an unlikely reunion between those two parties, at least based on what I understood of the situation. It is a tricky situation to discuss. There's a severe lack of transparent information, and there's a lot of emotion around all the different facets of the breakup and the reunion and all that saga. So I'm not going to get into any of that in too much detail because we could be here all night long, but what I want to focus on is that we've got the champ back on the grid, and I think that's good for the show. So I'm excited to see how he goes this weekend. Erebus are actually losing a driver though in the form of their co-driver, David Russell. It was announced quite surprisingly that he's on his way to Premier Newlon Racing despite being contracted to co-drive with Erebus in this year's Enduros. These cars are obviously in their second season of racing now, and thankfully the headlines attached to them are gradually starting to slow down, at least the negative headlines. Supercars have done some more center of gravity testing though. This was done after the Melbourne event, and center of gravity is one of the parity pillars that they assess to make sure the cars are performing equally. It's a very concerning test to look at photos and footage of, because they literally just sort of tip the cars up and work out at what point they fall over. Of course, there's some computers and math at play to bring some science to the whole equation, but it always looks a little bit comical on camera. But everyone involved in the sport seems pretty satisfied it's a well-run test. And for me personally, I think it's actually the first proactive parity test I can think of since Gen 3 was introduced. All the others seem quite reactive based on, upset manufacturers or concerning differences on track between the cars. This one feels like a bit more of a box-checking exercise to bring a bit of confidence and clarity to all involved, but I think it's a good sign as well that they're finally getting some breathing room and getting on top of these cars. The other piece of news wasn't so positive. They have recalled the wheel spindles after an investigation into why Cameron Waters lost his wheel going through Griffin's Bend at the opening event at Bathurst. Clearly they've found some sort of issue there and have changed the design from this weekend onwards. On the topic of this weekend, let's talk about some of the storylines. Of course, we have to start with the return of New Zealand. I don't know about you guys, it feels like both a short time and a long time since Supercars were last blasting around Pukekohe in 2022, and it is so exciting to see the sport going back over the ditch. An estimated 160,000 people are expected around Taupō over the course of the 3 days of the event. It's a sellout crowd for Saturday and Sunday. Last I saw, there were a few tickets floating around for Friday, but I'm sure they'll be snapped up pretty soon if they haven't already. So so good to see the enthusiasm for supercars on that side of the pond. Strategy will be a really interesting point this weekend. It sounds like Taupō is a highly abrasive circuit, so they're going to be chewing through the tires. There is a minimum compulsory 2 pit stops per race. However, one quirk of the rules this weekend is that the minimum fuel drop that they have to stick in the cars has been abolished. So it's being hinted a lot of the teams will start on full tanks and then just do a little top up, which they'll have to do to make it to the checkered flags. I think the eyes of the supercars world will very much be on Kostecki and Erebus, working out how they're both performing now that they're reunited. Kostecki, of course, has been out of action for 2 races of this year's championship, and we've got to remember the cars have been refined since he last raced one as well, with the aero balance changing after the wind tunnel testing. It's only a minor change by the sounds of things, but nevertheless it will be a detail that he'll have to get up to speed on. And of course this will be an interesting way to sort of measure where Erebus are at as a team. It's been a team seeing a lot of change over the past few months, 2 new drivers, some structural changes within that team as well. So I think having Kostecki and Erebus back together, which was of course a winning combination in 2023, will be an interesting barometer to try and assess where the health of that team is at in terms of their on-track performance. It's been a while since I've embarrassed myself, so let's get into the predictions part of the show. As always, this is just a bit of fun, don't take it too seriously, but I do like to throw some things out there and see what sticks. Firstly, I am predicting we will have a breakthrough weekend for Ryan Wood. I'm predicting a top 5 finish for him in at least one of the races this weekend, and that would be a great result for him. He showed a lot of speed, especially around Bathurst, but got really unlucky in that opening round of the championship. Melbourne was a little bit shakier for him, but I'm curious to see if it's 3rd time lucky and he gets a great result in front of his home fans. I'm also predicting a top 5 result for Brodie Kostecki, and while some feel like this is quite a confident prediction, I really don't know, to be honest with you. Again, just a bit of a question mark over where Erebus is at with its performance in 2024. We will find out in the not too distant future though, but I do suspect Brodie Kostecki hasn't lost any of his driving talents, and even if that team isn't quite as strong as they were last year, I do suspect he'll drag a good result out of that car. And my final prediction is a barnstormer of a race finish for the win between Chev and Ford. The New Zealand fans deserve an awesome show after so long without supercars, and fingers crossed for those trackside and those like me at home, we get an exciting race. Thank you to those of you who submitted some of your own predictions as well. I'll read a few out like I always do, just to ensure it's not just me embarrassing myself. And if you want to get involved with stuff like this and polls and other stuff I do here on the channel, be sure to subscribe and keep an eye on the community tab where I put some of this stuff up. Sam Cooper has made quite a few predictions here. I'll pick out just a handful. Heimgartner for a podium, that would be a big result for he as a driver and Brad Jones Racing as a team. They've seemed to really struggle so far this year. I thought we'd see them build on the fairly solid foundation they set in 2023, but they do feel a bit lost at sea. So a podium for Heimgartner would be a very big turnaround. All 5 Kiwi drivers to make it into the Sunday top 10 shootout, that would be a huge result, especially I think for drivers like Jackson Evans, who like Heimgartner has really struggled to find his feet so far this year. Nevertheless, would not rule it out. Those guys are very talented. And finally, 4 safety cars in the Saturday race rather. And yeah, safety car risk around here will be very interesting to learn more about. I've noticed the gravel traps do look very deep, almost Barbagallo-esque, which is my local track here in Western Australia. So I do suspect if any cars wind up in there, they will be stuck and likely bring out the safety car. Shiny Starmine Studios here has done some predictions specifically around Brodie Kostecki, and he really is potentially the most fascinating part of this whole weekend. Shiny's predicting that he'll probably run the first race around where Todd Hazelwood ran. With the other races, he'll probably get top 5s, and it'll probably be a couple of rounds before he starts challenging for wins. And yeah, this is kind of roughly my feeling as well. I do suspect he'll probably pull out a stellar result in either the Saturday or Sunday race, as I predicted, a potential top 5. But yeah, I do suspect it'll take at least a couple of rounds for him to bed back in and start putting in the performances he did last year. One thing's for certain, Brodie Kostecki has a lot of ground to make up in the Drivers' Championship. I actually asked you guys where you think, or how you think Brodie will perform. Most of you guys thinking he'll pick up a few race wins, which I think is a fair shout. 9% of you, however, suspected he may even challenge for the championship. He's got a long way to go though, because Will Brown leads the way on 575 points, with Brock Feeney not too far behind in second. A very intense rivalry, I think, building between those two drivers, which has all been clean so far. Chaz Mostert there in third on 478 points. Nick Percat in fourth, who's had a great start to the season with Matt Stone Racing. David Reynolds in fifth, Richie Stanaway in sixth, Matt Payne seventh, Thomas Randall in eighth, and Todd Hazelwood, who will no longer be driving at least full-time for the foreseeable future. He's there in ninth, but he'll be back for the Enduros. On the team side of the championship, Red Bull and Pole Racing have stolen a march on their rivals, although I do feel like the series is a lot more competitive than the standings suggest. The Red Bull team have really gotten away quite lucky, I think. Chaz Mostert wasn't too far behind them in Bathurst, and in Melbourne they certainly capitalised on the misfortune of others to get a strong points lead. Penrite Racing is the team in second, though DeWalt and Trady Beer Racing in third, MSR in fourth, Erebus Motorsport in fifth, Walkinshaw Andretti United in sixth, Tickford in seventh, and Premier Newlon Racing just squeaking into my screenshot here in eighth. On the support categories front of things, we've got some great categories lined up supporting supercars this weekend. We have New Zealand Formula Ford, we've got the Toyota 86 Championship New Zealand, Central Muscle Cars, which are a rare treat we get on the support bill for supercars. Looking forward to that one, and the Porsche Carrera Cup, which has made the trek over the ditch to join supercars in New Zealand. And that will bring this show to a close. I must admit I felt quite rusty recording this, but we got through it. Thank you so much for your support and your patience as well while I was away. I'm so excited to be back, and even more excited that we have supercars back in New Zealand. The fans are awesome, the drivers are incredible, and the tracks have a lot of character as well. So I cannot wait to see supercars hit the road, and cannot wait to sum it all up as well in my round review, which will drop shortly after the events. In the meantime, thank you for your support. Be sure to subscribe, treat people like your trackside, and I will see you in the next video.